Um, Welcome to Chasing the News with an interview with Dr. Gabor Mate. My name is Ahbra Kaye. I'm the producer of Chasing the News series and also the curator and producer of the Real Recovery Film Festival.
Alert from preview.
I want to introduce my co-host and business partner, Leonard Buschel, zooming in from the next room. He is the editor-publisher of the Addiction Recovery e-Bulletin. He's also the founder and director of Writers into Treatment. He has a KDAC, a certified drug counselor from the state of California, and a former drug addict and drug dealer with now 26 years of sobriety. And of course, I want to introduce our wonderful guest for today, Dr. Gabor Mate, physician, philosopher, addiction expert, and best-selling author of Scattered: How Attention Deficit Disorder Originates and What You Can Do About It When the Body Says No. You read the other one. Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And of course, the amazing In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. So thank you, Gabor, so much for being here and for meeting us here today. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Well,
and we just want to know how are you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
And I can't.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Thanks for having me and for the introduction. Actually, I've just finished writing a new book, and the epigraph is from Galen, who's a Roman physician back in the 1st century, I think. And he said, a physician should also be a philosopher. So thanks for calling me a philosopher.
Did you pal around with him at that time?
Yeah, I hung around with him. I'm that old. Speaking of age, it's your birthday, isn't it, Leonard?
It was on Saturday, yes. I turned the glorious new, yes, the odometer did switch.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us and being here. And
It's a pleasure.
I don't know why you're here, but I'm so happy.
Yeah, I don't know.
I figured,
why am I here?
now that you've finished your book, you must have a lot of free time on your hands, and you thought you'd come to LA via Zoom. I wanted to ask you something before we get to the questions that we had. Okay, it's billed as an intimate conversation with Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, let me just ask you, what did you have for breakfast today?
My usual. I had peanut, like a teaspoon or two of peanut butter and some kefir and some chai tea.
Okay, good enough. I know I didn't want to get into the fact that you're a vegetarian or vegan.
I'm not a vegan. I'm a
vegetarian.
Yeah. I used to joke that I'm a lacto-ovo-pesco-carno vegetarian.
I'm laughing.
but you can take out the carno part.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, just basically, how are you in this crazy world?
Well, for me, the question of how are you is always a moment by moment thing, you know. So yesterday morning, if you'd asked me, I was really upset, you know, in a really poor emotional state. And then I realized I haven't been taking care of myself the way I need to. So I started taking care of myself, and today I'm great. I'm feeling really well. That's the moment to moment question. So for me, the how you are is always related to how well I look after my inner self, you know. When I don't, I'm not well. In general, I have to say I'm well. Like the COVID thing, heavy as it is, didn't impact me personally very much because my only task for the last year was to stay home and write a book. So I didn't have any travel booked or anything. So really all I had to do is stay at home. And so the COVID simply made it more the COVID if anything encouraged me more to stay at home and do what I was supposed to do, which is to write. And I've been doing lots of events online in the last month or two, so I'm doing my usual thing of speaking, teaching.
What about the added concern for your 3 children or your wife or your close friends?
Well, the concern for my kids is to the extent that it's affected their lives and work. So that has had quite an impact on them, particularly on 2 of them, and it hasn't been easy for them. But
I would think not.
But I'm not. I haven't been worried about will they get infected or not. I mean, that hasn't been a concern of mine because they're taking care of themselves. And,
right.
You know, but you know, it's had an impact. You know, and it's hard to be functioning when there's no venue for that functioning, or when that venue has been really restricted, and that has affected a couple of my kids.
How is it with you sitting up there on the balcony of Canada overlooking the United States of America, where it seems like for the last 4 years, we've been under attack from within, culminating with this probably 200,000 unnecessary deaths that could have been prevented with early intervention last March.
I know
I
know that's the narrative, but I don't share that narrative in a number of ways. Yes, you've had a terrible 4 years of it, and you've had a completely dysfunctional, grandiose, narcissistic, and in my view, highly traumatized person. And I've been saying this for years and years and years in the White House, that he's really a trauma incarnate, childhood trauma incarnate.
Some people would say devil incarnate.
Well, they might say that, but in my mind, there's no devil. I mean, there's evil, but evil doesn't have like an absolute existence. Evil is really the human unconscious acting out its hostility on the rest of the world, like a Stalin or a Hitler, or in a much smaller way, a Trump. And then more recently, there was a book by his niece that details his childhood trauma, you know?
Yes.
So that's the first point. The second point is that I don't see the US the way you guys see it. I have a different view of the US.
Okay.
So everybody talks about how Trump is destroying Obama's legacy. Trump is Obama's legacy, as far as I'm concerned.
Understood. Yeah.
And so that the divisions, the inequality, the injustice, the racism. I mean, look at the outcry that happened after the death of George Floyd. Well, that there was this outcry is both a good thing and an outrage. The good thing is that a lot of people woke up. They had to, at least temporarily. The outrage is, didn't you know this was going on before?
Yeah.
This is only going on for 400 years. All of a sudden you realize that there's police racism and police violence against Black people in the States. You know, the American police was begun as slave patrols. That's its origin of American policing historically. So, and under Obama, Obama deported more illegal, quote unquote, immigrants than all previous presidents put together. So, so this thing that there's been this huge change. What's changed is the conversation has changed. It's become much more egregious. And people that hid in the cracks of society before will all of a sudden, by Trump, empowered to spew their hatred publicly. But he didn't cause the hatred, and for the source of that anguish behind that hatred, you have to really look at neoliberal policies for the last half a century or 45 years or so. So, and as far as, and you know what, I know I'm ranting a bit, but you gave me the permission to do it, I think.
I was going to say, let's not the whole hour be the cynics hour.
No,
well, I do have a question though also.
No, but before you do, I'm not being cynical.
No.
I actually believe in humanity. I believe in the positive potential.
I was projecting.
You know, now I'm not being cynical. I'm just telling you how I see it. And it's like happened after 9/11. All of a sudden, Americans are saying the world has changed. Now, that was a terrible event, 9/11. But what world were they living in? 3,000 people dying in a day? Well, that's a horrible event, granted. But you guys have been inflicting that on the rest of the world for decades. When I say not you guys, I don't mean you personally, but I mean the American system.
No, our tax money has
Yeah.
been.
So when you talk about America living a nightmare for the last 4 years, all I'm saying is, for all the beautiful potential in America, and all the beautiful people in America, and all the creativity and dynamism and vitality that really draws me to things American. At the same time, you also live in a kind of bubble where you just don't see reality. And what's happened in the last 4 years is that reality, in my view, that reality has become more manifest. That's all that's happened.
Okay. I guess just when someone's in office who's using his last month to do the first federal executions, like almost one a week, seems a little bit sadistic to me. I think he's a sadist.
He's a sadist.
Yeah, okay, well, I don't think Obama was a sadist. He might have been a fool.
No,
He
I-
wasn't a sadist. Abra, what's up?
yeah.
Well,
Go
my
ahead.
question is, I heard you, I was watching some of the podcasts, and you brought up Trump in another podcast and talked about the terrible childhood trauma that he suffered and abuse. And you seem to have a lot of compassion for that. And I believe you do have compassion, but how do you measure the compassion for someone's childhood trauma or for the human condition with, living with the consequences of their actions? Some people's consequences are on a small scale, and then some politicians and the consequences of their childhood trauma are enacted on a very large scale. And it's how do you live with the conflict between?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see that?
I understand. First of all, in terms of harm done, nobody speaks about George Bush like the way they talk about Trump. But Bush killed a lot more people. He massacred 500,000 Iraqis on a total lie. There was no weapons of mass destruction. Anybody with half a mind always knew there was no weapons of mass destruction. But Bush and Tony Blair and their cohorts around the world, they invaded a country, they killed up to 500,000 people, given whose figures you accept. And I'm going to give you guys another fact, and this is not an anti-American rant. I'm just talking about reality, people. If I asked you how many indigenous people in Guatemala were massacred in the 1980s and 1990s with American support and American weapons, how many would you say?
I don't have a
Thousands.
Sorry?
Hundreds of thousands.
100,000 exactly. Okay.
100.
Most Americans haven't got a clue. So when we talk about people being destructive, yeah, Trump is a sadist. He's an egotist. He's a misogynist. He's anything you want to say about him. That's all true. But these other presidents that seem a lot saner, and they are a lot saner, they just carry out the same criminality more sanely. That's the only difference, And now in terms of compassion and recognizing trauma, well, look, Stalin was a horribly abused child. That's why he became Stalin. If you get a horribly abused person and they gain position of power, they're going to act out their trauma on a whole society. Now, that doesn't really explain what happened in the Soviet Union. It's not just one person. It's a whole system.
Well,
and
I think,
the same with Hitler. Hitler was a horribly abused child, and he was a grandiose sadist. Now, given a certain society, that grandiose sadism will have opportunity to play itself out on a vast historical tragic scale. Can you have compassion for these people? Yes, you can have compassion for them and shoot them if you have to. You can shoot somebody with compassion. So I'm not saying that compassion, recognizing the trauma, means you don't oppose them and you don't stand up against their manifest evil. You do. It's just a question of how you understand where it comes from. That's all.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into a Trumpian
Yeah.
tyrant.
we should,
Let's face it, I think everyone felt a little safer when Obama had the nuclear football rather than Trump the last 4 years.
I didn't.
Because his state of mind is not stable and he can kill 100,000 people with one little button.
I didn't because I trusted the American system not to let Trump push that button.
Well, hopefully that's unfolding now with the election, with the new president coming in.
I think that I'd love to move off of politics for a minute, and so would actually our viewers, our listeners, viewers.
Can I just remind you what Frank Zappa said about politics? He said politics is the entertainment division of the military-industrial complex.
Well, and fair enough, but let me say something. As far as I'm concerned, I have not been talking about politics. I've been talking about perceptions of reality. And I've been talking about what the impact of childhood experience on adult functioning. That's what I've been talking about. The examples we've been talking about happen to be politicians. But to me, that's not the important point. To me, the important point is how do we perceive reality? Are we, and secondly, what's the impact of childhood experience? And what happens in a society when society gets to the point where such traumatized individuals get to occupy the positions of highest power? Those to me are important questions, way beyond politics. And by the way, in this new book that I wrote, I mentioned that I quoted the Galen, the Roman physician, about the other epigraph to the book is by the German physician Rudolf Virchow, who's one of the founders of modern physiology and medicine, and we still talk about some of his findings in medical school. And he said in 1860s that there's no medicine without looking at the politics of a society. He said because the job of because in order to create health, we have to look at the politics that get in the way of people living healthy lives.
Yes, he's trending on Instagram this morning, I thought.
Rudolf Virchow, it's about time because he's been dead for over 150.
Well, hopefully your new book will bring him to the fore.
And when is that coming out? Or
Well,
can you say, or not yet?
2022, I have to rewrite it. It's way too long. It's way too complicated.
Oh no! Amazon has it. It's coming out in February of 21.
No, it was supposed to be the fall of 21, but the fact is, I've written way too much, too complicated. There's a lot of dead space that needs to be cut out. It'll be a great book when it's done, but it'll need another half a year's of work before it gets to the great stage.
And not just a great book, but an important book.
Well, I hope so.
You
know that famous image by Michelangelo about how you carve a David. You know that beautiful statue.
Yes.
He says something like, "You take a huge piece of rock, and you keep cutting it away until David emerges." You know, or he says something like that.
So your book is that.
So that's how I feel about this book of mine. I have to keep carving till this great book emerges.
And it's not called There Is No Normal, right? It's the myth of normal.
The myth of normal.
The myth of normal, illness and health in an insane culture. Yeah.
Okay. Ahbra.
Yes. I actually wanted to ask you a question about COVID.
Yeah.
So I was reading your book, When the Body Says No.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about it and wondering, is there a correlation between traumatic childhood experience, the subsequent emotional dysregulation as an adult, and the increased risk of contracting contracting COVID and then getting sicker, not as sick, getting a more advanced case? I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think that's a really fascinating question, and I've thought about it. So first of all, what I don't want to do is reduce everything down to one thing. So if you happen to be a person of color,
right,
and with employment in a place with poor safety precautions and lack of unions so that they can't protect you, and you're living in crowded housing, you're going to have much higher risk of contracting COVID, regardless of what your childhood was like.
Right.
you know, so there's lots of different factors. And one of the things that COVID has done is it has stripped away some of the illusions about this society.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people are recognizing that, oh boy, there's inequality. And that we say that we're all in this together, but we're not on it together. You know, Trump gets the best of all possible treatment.
Mhm.
So what does somebody get who was a poor nursing home employee? You know, so, but to go back to your question though, when you look at COVID and who gets sick from it, it's not simply the virus that make people sick.
Right.
First of all, people have different responses to the virus. Some have immune systems that can take care of it quite well, and others who don't. So then you have to ask, well, what happens to the immune systems, the ones who don't mount a good immune response to COVID? And that already, now you're getting into the mind-body medicine, because the immune system is very much affected by your emotional stresses in life history. Number one. Number two, even more interestingly, in a significant number of cases, and this has been shown, there's studies on it, and I just found a couple this week, the damage of COVID is not done by the virus. You know what it's done by? It's done by the immune system response to the virus. So in some people, you get almost like an autoimmune response, where the immune system, egged on or triggered by the virus, attacks the body. And that what creates a lot of the illness in the lungs and in the brain and so on. So not all responses to COVID are immune self-assault, but a significant percentage of the of the worst cases are like that. Now, that then comes back to your question. And I think personally that in my study of autoimmune disease in general, yes, childhood trauma and emotional patterns have a lot to do with immune system responses, and particularly in cases where the immune system turns against the body. So yes, I think there's a percentage of cases where that has a role to play. Absolutely. Now, nobody's done those studies on COVID of childhood experience, and nobody would even think to do it. They don't even think in those terms. But there's been lots of studies on autoimmune disease in general.
Yeah, I read about that.
Like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, and so on. Lots of correlation between childhood trauma and autoimmune disease. Not that most physicians are aware of that. They're not. They just don't study that stuff. But it's
I have a question. I kind of have a couple questions because I was very interested in your book, When the Body Says No.
Yeah.
For one thing, my sister has MS, but you talked a couple of times about how in the beginning of the 20th century, MS was 1-to-1 between men and women. And
in the 1930s or so.
1930s. Yeah, it was equal.
It was about 1 to, in Canada at least it was 1-to-1. In the States it was close to 1-to-1 as well. Yeah.
And you said that it's 3-to-1, and that can't be accounted for by genetics or environmental, but that it's stress. But
yeah.
What I wonder is, what stress is different for women? What is the stress that has changed for women that they are now getting it more than men?
Yes. So let me just find you something here. So first of all, the fact is, just as you stated, that some decades ago, the gender ratio was much closer to 1-to-1 than it is now. Now it's 3.5 women to every man.
Right.
So if you consider what can have changed, well, it can't be genetic because genes don't change in a population over 80 years. It can't be the climate because that hasn't changed more for women than for men.
Right.
It can't be the diet because that hasn't changed more for women than for men. So what has changed? And I say what has changed is the degree of stress. Because women in this society, I'm not blaming anybody here, but in a patriarchal society, women have had the roles of being the emotional stress absorbers of their whole family system. So they absorb the stresses of their men, which is why married men live longer than unmarried men.
Right.
But married women have much less of an advantage that way. And let me tell you an amazing study from Sweden. Now we know that stress, it increases the risk for prematurity in terms of birth, okay? Premature birth. In this study in Sweden, they looked at post prepartum, prenatal depression in the mother and the father. And prenatal depression in the mother was associated with late premature births in infants. Prepartum depression in the father was associated with much more dire, earlier premature birth.
Yeah.
How do we explain that?
Oh, it makes sense to me as a
Why does it make sense to you?
mother because there's a strong need and desire to take care of the needs of one's husband.
Exactly.
And the also the husband tends to want the wife's attention and will suck it away from anything else.
Exactly.
Hopefully not in a healthy relationship, but in a lot of relationships.
Exactly. That's the point I'm making. So women have always had that stress that you just so eloquently described. Okay. On top of that now, sometimes by choice, but sometimes by sheer necessity, they have to be out there in the workforce.
Right.
Now, in itself, that's a good thing if a woman chooses to express herself in the workforce, but not if she still has to carry that first stress and have the stress of making a living as well. Now you've doubled the stress, right?
Right.
And thirdly, all this is happening in a context of less social support. There's more isolation now. Parents are more isolated. There's less community, less contact. There's an epidemic of loneliness. So more stress, less social support, more multiple sclerosis. And so, and by the way, when it comes to multiple sclerosis, I've just brought up the page from my new book. Let me just read you a few facts.
Okay.
People with MS have more unwanted stress or traumatic events between 6 months to 2 years before the onset. Stress predicts relapse. The more stress, the greater the relapse risk.
Mm-hmm.
After one stressful life event, the risk increases 2 or 3 times. After 3 or more, the risk increases 5 to 7-fold. Multiple sclerosis patients have histories of childhood trauma 2 or 3 times as often as the general population. I can go on and on and on and on. I'm talking about the studies that have been done, and none of this enters into treatment. So when you go see a neurologist with your multiple sclerosis, all you're going to get is some injections. And nobody's ever going to ask you, what stresses are you carrying in your life? What happened to you as a child? How do you relate to yourself? Do you absorb the stresses of your partner?
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff is never looked into. And that's that's another rant of mine of just the ignoring by the medical profession of the unity of mind and body and of the stress and trauma connection when it comes to illness.
Thank
Can
you.
Can I bring up the hold on to your kids? My
Please.
parents should matter more than peers.
Of course.
Thank you. Because in this, you say that parenthood has been undermined.
Yeah.
Now they know by who and why. And then
Right.
I'll have a follow-up question regarding technology. But
Sure.
who and why is parenthood being undermined? And I consider child rearing the most important act of mankind. It seems like there is nothing more important than taking care of a infant until he can walk and talk and work and love.
Yes.
So who's undermining parenthood?
Right. So first of all, what you just said about parenting, the most important task, I wish I had known that 50 years ago or 40 years ago. And I wish I had understood its implications when I had small kids, but I didn't, you know. So here's the thing. To answer your question, you have to look at human history, but not just human history, but human prehistory. So how did human beings evolve? So for hundreds of so hominims or human-like creatures have been walking the earth for about, I don't know, 500,000 years. And before then, there were hominids, apes, including, human-like apes. For a couple of million years, I forget the exact numbers.
A couple million.
And our own species, Homo sapiens sapien, has been walking the earth for, I think it's about 150,000 years, give or take.
Okay.
Now, for all of that history, and history only begins with when there's a record of history, like monuments and implements and digs of human habitation and all this kind of stuff. So all of prehistory and even for much of history, how did human beings live? They lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups, 50 to 80 people, which meant what? Which meant that the kids were always around their parents all the time. Not goodbye, I'm going off to work, see you at night. And you go off to daycare, taken care of by strangers. No, the kids were surrounded by nurturing adults, not just their parents, but by the whole community. It was communal parenting in a sense that in these hunter-gatherer tribes, all the parents were seen as all the adults. The kids had a special relationship with their own parents, but they were taken care of by the whole community. Mothers were not isolated in a home. There was what was called being allo mothering, where other women would come in and nurture the child as well, as would uncles and aunts and older siblings and so on. So kids in small by hunter groups, there was no separation. There's no, you sleep in your own cave. There's the baby cave and there's the adult cave. None of that nonsense. Kids were not hit in general in that world. And kids were not allowed to cry. When I say they're not allowed to cry, it's not that they were forbidden to cry. It's that they were picked up and held before they even cried, which means that their stresses were soothed as soon as it happened. None of this stuff that we're telling mothers and fathers, let the kid sleep it off or let the kid cry it out and time out, separate from them when they're not behaving according to your specifications. Nonsense. It undermines child development. So it's not a question of who is undermining parenting. It's that the way civilization has developed, and especially modern industrialized capitalism, is that we separate kids from their parents, stress parents, destroy community, teach parenting techniques that are actually the opposite of what the child needs. And then we're wondering how come all these kids are being diagnosed with this, that, and the other. So what has undermined parenting is what we like to call civilization. And we've totally forgotten about our hearts. Now, let me tell you an amazing study. You guys you're gonna fall off your chairs. So anchor yourself really well, okay?
Okay.
I found this study 2 years ago. I don't know how many PhDs it took to figure this one out. How many PhDs it took to figure, but you know what they found? They found that grandmothers are good for kids.
Yeah.
And even more astonishingly, you know what they found out? The closer the grandmother lives to the child, the better. Isn't that astonishing? What modern science can tell us? Now, let me tell you something. I've spoken to Kukums, grandmothers in Aboriginal tribes in Canada. And one of them from, I think, the Cree Nation told me, in our tradition, the kid doesn't even touch the ground till they're 2 years old. They're always being held. And I've also been told, a young guy in one of the native communities told me, I was talking about how prenatal stress affects the baby's brain development. This is modern science. We have ultrasound scans, we have EEGs, we have heart rate monitoring, we have ultrasounds, if I didn't say that already. We have all these blood test results. And so now we know, epigenetic studies, so now we know that prenatal stress affects the developing infant brain. Whoopee for us. So this young guy in his native community told me, in our community, there was a kind of a law which said, if a woman was pregnant and you were stressed, you were not permitted to go near them because we didn't want your stress being passed on to the pregnant mother and therefore the baby. In other words, this wisdom has always been around and we've lost it.
Okay, jumping to the here and now.
Yeah.
What do you think the best and the worst things what are the best and worst things that have come from technology, especially when it's aimed at children? younger and younger. And how long do you think it'll take before, an infant, rather than yelling, "I want my milk," it yells, "I want my app"?
Well, that's been studied. And when you talk about who is undermining parenthood, well, I talked about society changing, but it's much more nefarious and insidious than that, because, the food companies, we know this, it's been documented. I'm not making this up.
I know.
I was talking to John Perkins, and John Perkins wrote a book called "I Used to Be a Hitman for the CIA," I think. And he said to me that, he says, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist." He says, "I'm a conspiracy realist." And I'm the same way. So when it comes to the food companies, they actually conspire with scientists to find the right combination of sugar, fat, and salt that's going to hit that sweet spot in your brain. That's going to make you addicted. Addicted. Now, food addiction kills many more people than some other addictions do. Now, to go back to the technology, the technology companies have done the same thing.
Mhm.
How do you excite the incentive, motivation, and reward chemicals in the brain? And how do you sell those products to the public, including to kids? So this has been studied, and it's been done, and it's been documented. Now, this is evil. Talk about evil. This is evil. And those screens and those gadgets, as adults, we know how addictive they are. I mean, you know what? I'm a, God sakes, I'm older than you are, Leonard, even though you got more gray hair than I do, but I'm older, okay? Hate to point that out, but it's just a fact. But I find it difficult not to be addicted to my cell phone, you know?
Yes,
And here I've written a book on addiction, Now,
it can be very useful.
kids are totally helpless in the face of it. And the more the parents are disconnected from the kids, the more the kids are going to find the solace in the temporary dopamine and endorphin hit they get from their technology. And the more they're disconnected from the nurturing adult world, the more they're going to seek their peers on Facebook. So on Facebook, what do people find? Friends. And what happens on Facebook?
Or lack of friends.
Oh yeah. And what do people do?
And
They like each other. In other words, all the attachment dynamics that human beings are supposed to meet
yeah,
provided by this technology.
But it's all false. I mean, one of the things that you say is that our capitalist culture, our capitalist society creates artificial needs, but has no ability to meet our authentic needs.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really relate to that. I've always thought that if there's an American religion, it's consumerism.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, and savage capitalism runs it. I just wanted to get back to these brilliant food scientists. Are they the ones who taught the Sackler family how to produce and promote their OxyContin to get so many people addicted and then dead?
No, but if you look at the Sackler family, you see that they're simply a representative of a certain species, the species that happen to run our society. And these are the, well, do you know the book and the film by Joel Bakan called The Corporation?
Mm-mm.
Can I show you something?
don't.
Can I jump up from my computer for a minute?
I don't. Please. Yeah,
I'll be right back.
sure, we'll just talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
So how's it for you so far?
It's been great. We have lots of, I'm just going to read you from the chat. Oh, okay, he's back.
No, we have 700
I'm going to show you a
trying
book.
to ask questions.
I'm showing you the book. It's called The New Corporation by Joel
Okay,
Bakan.
good. I was going to ask you to recommend some poetry and nonfiction and fiction before we're done.
I'm happy to do that. But Bakan is a law professor at UBC here in Vancouver, University of British Columbia. He wrote a book called The Corporation, maybe 15 years ago now. That was made into a film, quite a successful film. What Bakan says is, what's a psychopath, he said. A psychopath is somebody who doesn't care about anybody else's needs, who's totally selfish, and is quite willing to hurt them for his own benefit. Now, since by American law, corporations are defined as persons for the sake of protecting them from legal suits. If they're persons, what kind of persons are there? He says they're psychopaths. And so that the tobacco companies who decades denied the impact of cigarette smoking, the food companies who diligently and doggedly seek out the most addictive ways to get people hooked on junk foods, the energy companies that for decades knew about climate change. By the way, do you happen to know when the first warning about climate change caused by human beings was issued? Anybody make a guess?
100 years ago.
Sorry?
100 years ago. I don't know. It's like really a guess.
I remember Earth Day.
Yeah,
That was 50. Earth Day was 50 years ago.
Over 200 years ago.
200 years ago.
And it's a book I can recommend for you by a very famous scientist and explorer called Alexander von Humboldt. After the Humboldt current is named, you know. But anyway, the point I'm making is that these corporations, let alone the weapons corporations, you know, let alone the news corporations and their pandering to people's cheapest tastes, you know, one could go on and on and on. So the Sackler family didn't have to learn anything from anybody. They belong to that species, and that species runs this country. Not this country, this world.
But we're part of that species, so I mean, we are engaging in it.
No, we're not. We're not part of that species. I'm talking about that 1/10 of 1% that actually runs the world.
Okay.
And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just the reality.
No, it is. It is the reality.
Research who makes the decisions. I mean, you guys think you live in a democracy. We think we live in a democracy.
Oh, no.
What democracy? Who actually makes the? Do we ever get to vote for the Sacklers? Do we get to vote for the tobacco companies? Do we get to vote for the corporations that all the presidents kowtow to? Do we get to vote for the corporations whose representatives move in and out of government all the time? Do we get to vote for the corporations who fund all the senators, without whose support nobody gets elected, except here or there?
What do we do to change it?
No, you're back to politics, aren't you?
No, I'm not really. I'm not, because I think that a lot of what I read and what I'm listening about you is that you have a holistic view.
Yeah.
And that it goes to society, but the sickness within us and the trauma that's individual is societal.
Yes, it is.
So I don't think it's just politics. I think that individuals need change to come from within. And I just,
yeah, that's true. Absolutely. Well, I think actually it has to happen on multiple levels, including internally.
Of course.
Like I know that if I don't take care of my internal mental space, I was talking about that earlier.
Right.
I can be very hurtful to other people.
Yes.
I can function, I don't want to say in a sociopathic way, but in moments, I can be very insensitive.
Right.
You know, and not think of the impact of what I'm doing on other people, including people very close to me, you know? So yes, it has to be internal. At the same time, it has to happen on the economic and social levels as well, because otherwise the same people will stay in control, because the people who run things are never going to do the work of self-transformation.
No.
Can I ask one more question before we open up to viewers? I was going to ask you, initially I had this question, like, what classical pieces would you recommend to someone who was actively using heroin?
Classical pieces?
What music? And then I went online and I watched a movie about Glenn Gould, the fellow Canadian of yours.
Yeah.
And one of the comments, and it wasn't on any kind of recovery site, one of the comments was about one of his albums, says, when I was hooked on opiates, this is one of the few things that made me feel better. I'm now 2.5 years clean and sober, and it still gives me relief.
Is it the Goldberg Variations?
Probably, yes. Yes, it was. Is that Bach?
Well, first of all, I have about 8 versions of that, and you can't get too many, you know.
There's a 300 box set that was just released.
Of what, Glenn Gould or the Goldberg?
Of Glenn Gould, like everything.
Oh, yeah, I know.
He's addicted to recording in the studio.
No, I have a lot of Glenn Gould, but I'm talking about the Goldberg Variations. I have about 8 or 9 different versions of it.
Right.
Including 3 by Glenn Gould. And I don't know how to answer your question, Leonard, because I don't know that there's a lot of people whom any kind of classical music will save from heroin addiction. So I don't know what to say about that.
Right. I don't want to say make it more comfortable or how about if they were in detox? What
Okay, if I had
what
to
would help?
if I had to recommend music to help soothe people and to bring them close to themselves, you couldn't do better than the Goldberg Variations.
Okay.
And there's a beautiful version by Lang, the Chinese pianist that just
Yeah.
came out this year. Ah, it's to die for.
Oh, okay.
As a matter of fact, when you say it's to die for, when I'm dying, I hope to play that for me. That'll be
I
nice.
hope I get morphine. Okay, but so to each his own.
How about both? That'd be in a good trip.
Really.
So I do want to ask you a couple questions from our audience. Some people sent them in ahead of time, but this one is from Tim Harrington. Dr. Mate, is it the drug behavior or is it our relationship to the person, place, or thing when it comes to the experience of addiction? Also, can you tell us the difference between addiction and dependence?
Yeah. So let me start with the second one. Dependence is a physiological thing. Dependence simply means that if you stop a substance, you're going to go through withdrawal symptoms because of certain changes in the brain that are caused by the substance that I won't go into now. But basically, dependence means that when you stop it, you're going to have withdrawal. Now, you don't have to be addicted to be dependent. In other words, addiction to me is a craving and a relentless seeking out of something for temporary pleasure and relief despite negative consequences. That's what addiction is. But people can become dependent, for example, on the antidepressants. They're not craving them. They're not seeking them, in a compulsive way. But when they stop them, they go through severe withdrawal sometimes. That's dependence. So you can, many addictions have dependence associated with them, but not every dependence represents an addiction. You get the difference?
Yes.
Okay. What's the first part of the question?
Is it the drug behavior or is it our relationship to the person, place, or thing? Oh, is it the drug behavior? So it's the addictive behavior, whether it be to a drug or to a process, or is it the relationship to the person, place, or thing when it comes to the experience of addiction? What is the issue?
I'm not sure I understand the question to tell you the
I
truth.
don't know, me either. I think we'll move on. So how do you stay
I have a question regarding that. Not really, I'm just saying that. Do you feel in the process of getting sober for people who are addicted to one thing or another and staying sober, do you feel like self-actualization is an important mission to be on simultaneously with your attempt to get off, unhealthy drugs or life habits?
Right.
Is self-actualization essential to the process of getting sober?
Okay. So first of all, let's make a distinction between abstinence and sobriety. So abstinence is staying away from something, and that's a good thing. But it's not the same as sobriety. Okay. When you think of sober reflection, after sober reflection, I decided such and such. Sobriety involves a presence of state of mind.
Okay.
You can be abstinent without having a presence of mind. So I just make that distinction between the two. People sometimes say, I've been sober for 20 years. No, they haven't. They've been abstinent for 20 years. They haven't had a single moment of presence of mind. Okay. So when I talk about sobriety, that's the sense in which I mean it. Now, when you say self-actualization, it all depends on what you mean by that word. If you mean, do I have a successful career? Am I good looking? Do people love me? No, the answer is no. You can have all that and not be sober. It's not, so self-actualization, depending on how you mean it. Now, if you mean being in touch with yourself, knowing who you are as something larger than your little ego, and being connected to that, if you like, higher self and to the universe, well then yes, that's what's necessary. And so that this is a point I keep making, which is linguistically trivial, But when we talk about recovery, that's a telling phrase, because to recover something is to find it.
Mhm.
And to find something, it means it's never been destroyed, has it? If it's been destroyed, you couldn't find it. And so when you ask people, what is it that you recovered? What did you find when you recovered? 99% of the time, you know what they say? I found myself.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I actually asked a fellow countryman of yours, Marion Woodman, the great Jungian psychologist
Yeah.
from Canada. I said, what's your solution, or what's your method for long-term sobriety or recovery?
Yeah.
And she said to constantly be on the path of self-discovery.
Yes,
You don't ever try and stop getting to know yourself better.
that's right.
And that will help with not the abstinence, but the sobriety.
That's right. And for some people, that self-awareness and that knowing of the self does happen in the form of a direct download, you know,
Mhm.
and that can happen through spiritual work or through sheer grace, and sometimes through psychedelic work. But for most of us, and certainly for me, it's never happened like that. It really is an ongoing journey of discovery. And when I get off that journey, I very much feel like Dante, you know, who in the first line of the Inferno, the Divine Comedy, he says, halfway through life, I lost my way. And I don't know how I got lost in his deep, dark woods, but then it was so, you know, and then he has to go through all these experiences to get back to the path. And so that's why Jesus talks about it, how the road to the kingdom of God is such a narrow, choose the narrow path, he said, because a lot of all these big highways, people get lost on them. But the path towards the self, it's a narrow path, and you have to walk it diligently. And it's okay if you get off it, but then you have to get back on it.
Mhm.
I'm lucky I had one of those other experiences 26 years ago. I drove myself to the Betty Ford Center in the middle of the desert, and it was August. It was very hot.
Okay.
And after the first day, I thought, I want to leave.
Yeah.
But that night, I read in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, there's a long passage and quote from Carl Jung. So I thought, oh, Carl Jung, he's part of this and interesting. The next day, I walked outside, and all desire for drugs left me in about 10 seconds. I could feel it literally leave my body, like a parlor trick. Like, oh, I'll get rid of the hanky out of your pocket. And I'd been using drugs literally every single day for 26 years, every day.
Wow.
And in an instant, I knew I was free. It was a bizarre feeling. It was very strange, frightening too, but also I'd never been the subject of a miracle. And that's all I can call it. It was a miracle. There was an opening there. And I know the Japanese have a saying, at its extreme, everything turns to its opposite. So after 26 years of using drugs every day, in an instant, it was gone. And I used the 12 steps to stay that way. But I was going to ask you, if it's not too personal.
Before you go on, though,
Yeah.
That experience that you had, Leonard, it's so wonderful, and it is grace, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And although it did take you dragging yourself there to have the experience, it didn't happen just like that. So, but all of a sudden you felt, when you say that the desire to use drugs left you, we can state it much more positively than that. I think you'll agree. It's not just that something left you, it's that there was also something there. Presence was there, and spaciousness was there, and freedom was there, and possibility was there.
Well, every filter I had between me and the world was gone.
Yes.
So here it was, just unadulterated. They call it life on life's terms, which...
Listen, if you could guarantee that this would happen to me, I'd start drinking right now into a stupor, and then I'd drive myself to the Betty Ford Clinic or wherever you had this. If you can guarantee I'll have that experience.
But
no, I can't. You have to start with pot.
Oh, you
Speaking of pot,
the experience of having the desire for drugs and alcohol lifted is different than having the experience of being sober and working through life issues as a sober person without drugs and alcohol over a period of time.
Yes.
Mine was, like they say, the educational variety. You know, it happened little by little by little. And I have to go off the path, and I have to experience pain and get back on. Yeah, so, you know, I don't know. I'm not sure that, you know, I'm not sure that everyone has it the same way. And I'm not sure that,
No, most
I'm actually positive that there, to my feeling, there is no one experience that changes your life. And I always thought it was like
I
that.
disagree, because that changed my life.
Yeah, but then you hit on other things. Other things come up in your life and you have to work again.
Yeah, but that moment
God.
was an extraordinary moment. No different than being pulled out of my mother's birth canal.
Yeah.
Not at all. Same thing.
It was that's why Jesus says that you have to be reborn again, doesn't he?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, he had these two good Jewish boys talking about Jesus, but then he was a good Jewish boy too. But
And
yeah,
I think he has a birthday coming up.
yeah, he does in a few days. And although it's probably a false birthday, but
Probably.
in the sense that anyway, what I was going to say is that, yeah, you had that experience, Leonard, and nobody can take that away. I mean, that's a genuine rebirth, what they call direct experience. And I've known people who've had them, but for most of us, like myself, and I think for Ahbra, and for most of us, it's more incremental, it's more steady work. And even you had to do things later on to integrate it into your life, didn't you? It didn't just stay with you by itself.
Well, I had to incorporate the teachings of not just Carl Jung, but Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
I had to understand that I was now on an unintoxicated hero's journey, which would bring me a lot of Soros, not George Soros, but actual, you know, pain and that I had to get through. It was a challenge. It's like I was telling, it's a game. Life is a game. I used to be, and I still am, very macrobiotic. And whenever we went into a macrobiotic camp, little Michel Couchy was up there, and we'd always start by singing, "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream." You can't argue with that. You can't disprove that.
I actually have an interesting question. If you could upload one question to the collective conscious, what would it be?
That's a great one. Yeah. It'd be why.
Why?
Yeah, question mark.
All right, I have another one from the audience, just because they're here too. Is it your experience that the different autoimmune diseases are a reflection of different problems with consciousness? For example, some people intuit that ulcerative colitis is an expression of the refusal to take responsibility for one's own life.
You know, I don't make those distinctions too much. All of these autoimmune diseases, in my experience, and the degenerative neurological diseases as well, they all have to do with deep suppression of the self. And when people take responsibility for their lives, well, to me, that sounds a bit judgmental, you know?
Yes.
It's more like it's true, but how can you take responsibility until you're conscious? So without consciousness, there's no responsibility. So that's why actually I tend to be harsher on an Obama than on a Trump.
Yeah.
Not in terms of how I judge them as politicians or as people, but an Obama whose biography I'm just reading, and he had his own particular traumas, not to the same degree that Trump did, but he knew a lot more than Trump ever did. And he went against what he knew.
We called him the assassin. We called him the assassin in chief around here.
Yeah, well, fair enough. But Trump never knew what Obama knew. So who's more culpable? That's an interesting question. But what I'm saying is that, and I'm not saying which is more attractive and who's more intelligent and any of that stuff, and who's more decent even.
Well, no,
I'm talking about without consciousness, there's no responsibility. And so when I say to, I don't want to say to people, you haven't taken responsibility, because they weren't conscious.
Yeah, there's it's interesting. I've been reading Anthony DeMello, and he says that there's no evil that can occur in ignorance.
That's right. But it's a high ideal.
It's a very high ideal. It's not really a day-to-day kind of thing, but it is interesting in what you say is when you, if you're aware of the damage you're doing, it's probably more egregious than if you're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gabor, would you mind sharing, do you have any spiritual practice that you do on a regular basis that you'd want to share with us?
Well, I mean, funny you should ask, because the answer is that I do, but it's a question of do I do them? So I've learned meditation. There's a certain yoga program that I used to do, and then I dropped it. And just yesterday, I started it again. And it's already made a difference for me, you know.
Kundalini?
Because you knew I was going to ask that question, so you wanted to have the right answer. Okay.
That's why I did it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And as soon as this.
What about swimming? How's the swimming going?
So the answer is yes. I'm committed right now to doing 50 minutes of yoga twice a day.
Wow.
And I also do spiritual reading. Yes, physical exercise, including swimming 3 times a week and my elliptical machine and so on. That's essential for me. That helps me keep me relatively sane, but it's not spiritual work.
No. Can I ask you one other question?
Yeah.
I can't imagine how often you used to fly before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I sense you haven't flown as much in this last.
At all.
How do you feel not being on an airplane and going to the airport and going through customs? How does it feel not flying?
Yes. Well, I look forward to some travel when this is over.
Right.
But never again am I going to do what I used to do.
Okay.
That frequent traveling that ceases being on the road, teaching, speaking. First of all, I'm doing it online quite a bit now.
Right.
Secondly, even if it wasn't possible to do it online, I would really pick and choose, because I don't need to be that person who's always out there ignoring his own needs and his own family's needs. I
Right.
need to do something in the world. I don't
Well-
need to be that person anymore.
Well, now that you have to carve your book.
Never mind need to be. I don't want to be that person anymore.
Okay. All right. Like I said, now they have to carve your book down to David or Gabor.
Yeah. It's not going to be a David, but with any luck, it'll be a Gabor. You're right.
Another bestseller, I'm sure.
We hope so. From your mouth to God's ears, as they say.
The Myth of Normal. Isn't it amazing that the civilization has lasted this long? You ever find that?
No, it's amazing. It's just evolution, you know. Like if you actually look at the rate of change is rapidly increasing. So this civilization will not last that much longer. It's nuts to think. There was this American idiot who wrote this book called The End of History, Francis Fukuyama, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in 2000 or whenever it was that, you know, after the fall of the Soviet Empire, you know, and now history is over. And this actually became a serious subject of conversation. Like all of a sudden, we've stepped outside history. Well, now he's taken it back 20 years later. Brilliant.
What do you think? Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that this civilization, and I'm talking about end stage capitalism, if you look at the feudal system, slave owning systems, the feudal system, they last for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The British Empire had its heyday from early, let's say mid 18th century to mid 20th century, 200 years. The American Empire is immensely larger than any system in the history of the world.
Mm.
You have troops in more country than any country ever had anywhere. You have controlling stake in the economies. You know, you have 5% of the world's population. You consume 25% of the world's wealth. I'm just saying that's the reality. And it's already falling, isn't it? After 80 years of domination, it's already sinking. And now everybody's all asked about China because China is taking over, isn't it? So that what I'm saying is that the rate of change is increasing. This civilization, I can't tell you put it years, but historically, blink of an eye.
In 50 years, what do you think they'll refer to this era as?
Depends who's referring.
Right.
I
I
think,
mean, you know what, let me put it this way. If Hitler founded the 1,000-year Reich, didn't he, in 1933?
right.
It lasted exactly 12 years. And one of his, this is amazing, one of his officers said to him in 1945, with the Russians near the door of his bunker, he said, things haven't quite worked out the way we thought they would in 1933. Have they, mein Führer? You know, so, but if Hitler had survived another 80 years, he'd be looking back as a great success, wouldn't he? So it depends on who's looking back 50 years from now, Leonard, and I can't tell you who that'll be.
I guess they say the victors write history, but not the losers.
But I think that if sane people look back on this history, they're going to see a very fragmented, anxious, traumatized, split society with tremendous potential, tremendous creativity, wonderful human beings, but far from knowing themselves. That's what they'll see. And they'll look at our architecture, they'll look at what we do to the earth, and they'll think, how crazy were those people? That's what I think they'll see.
Pretty crazy. Ahbra, do you want to get a couple more questions before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna let one of them talk. I'm gonna try to give this a shot.
Okay.
Carol? All right, see if this works. Hi, Carol. Did you want to ask a question?
Carol Boyer looks like she has her microphone muted.
Yeah, I'm asking to. We'll see if this, we'll give this another minute or two.
Gabor, if you ever want to come back and do this again next month, let us know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for next month.
Or if you want a monthly column on this, you know, the Ask Gabor column, like next to the Dear Abby.
You know what? Okay, to quote Jesus again, get thee behind me, Satan.
Okay, I'm leaving.
You and your temptations.
Oh my gosh. No, you know, I
When I
don't.
say the Lord's Prayer, I say, lead me not into addiction, because I think temptation teaches you who you are and it teaches you how to be strong.
Yeah.
All right. I don't. I'm not sure I know what I.
Did Carol Boyer send in a question that we could read in English?
Yeah, I mean, I have other questions that people have sent in that I can
Sure one.
look at.
I know there's 90 people and we want them all to get their money's worth. So pick out the
Yeah,
ones
I know.
at the top of the list. Otherwise, I'm going to ask, Gabor, do you think every state that legalizes marijuana should pay reparations to everyone they ever imprisoned for marijuana? It's a new concept. I get it.
How about every person who's ever been oppressed and discriminated against in any way at all get reparations? You know, and
The country's already in debt. Yeah.
Well, we're in debt because we give
No.
all the money to the corporations and we don't tax them. That's why we're in debt. We're not in debt because we lack the funds.
Yeah.
So the answer is, a serious answer is, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was actually a social movement or a social consciousness that says, we've been hurting people and the people who've been hurting are suffering. So what reparations can we make to them? That'd be a wonderful question to ask. And it goes way beyond the marijuana question, doesn't it?
True, it does. But as a former drug dealer who walks past a marijuana store every day, knowing that there are people in other states still imprisoned.
Yeah, I know.
It's
but my answer includes those people. All I'm saying is the same question should be asked on a much broader scale.
Well, speaking of broader scale, would you like to offer like one or two solutions to anything that we're currently going through or involved in?
I did actually, I got a very long question by email and then she just brought it up again.
Okay.
Did she paraphrase it?
I'm going to paraphrase, which is basically wanting to know if it's the homeless or unhoused population, the very mentally ill and addicted population. If there's a chance that they'll be able to get psychedelic, MDMA or psychedelics to help with the mental illness and the addiction. Because according to her, those trials are only for healthy individuals.
Well, so let's put in the cart before the horse. The first thing they need is decent housing. The second thing they need is decent food. The third thing they need is a nurturing, emotionally holding environment. Now, in that context, including therapy, in that context, some of them might qualify for psychedelic treatment, but let's not start with that.
Right.
And I'm not a psychedelic evangelist. I mean, they can do amazing things, but it's not for everybody. And practically speaking, most people will never have access to it, because even if it legalized, who exactly can afford it? I mean, we're talking about, with MDMA, you're talking about 2 therapists, 6 to 8 hours at a time, 3 or 4 times with a single person.
It's a rich man's cure.
Yeah. So now, should it be available? Yes, it should be. But I'm saying that specifically with that population, they need a lot more before we even think about psychedelics. What? Come and do MDMA with me, realize your childhood trauma, and go back onto the street. I mean, I know the questioner didn't intend it that way, but really we got to take care of the basics first.
Okay.
Yes, of course. Of course.
What else we got? Gabor, do you think it takes a certain amount of courage for people to move in the direction of sobriety? Do you think literally courage, which you don't hear about much in rehabs? And my second question was, are there any changes to rehab programs that you would suggest to make them more effective?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
If courage means having fears, but still moving forward, it takes courage, yes.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you call that? That's what courage means. People sometimes call other people courageous who didn't have any fear about doing something. That's not courage. Whatever it is, it's not courage. Courage is when there's a fear there and you still do it, So yes, in terms of rehab and so on, the big piece missing from my perspective, including from AA, and not always, but generally, and many rehab programs, they don't understand trauma. So
I was talking about rehabs. In the rehab, forget the 12-step programs because they're all independently,
okay. Well, even the same thing in the rehabs. Some rehabs focus strictly on the behavior of the addiction and how to stay away from the addiction and or the behavior, whereas they don't deal with the underlying drive, which is the trauma. So
they should deal with that. So
you got to deal with the trauma.
All their programs should include trauma-informed therapy of some kind.
Absolutely.
Okay, sure.
That's the big missing piece. And the problem is that the average physician never even hears the words trauma in 4 years of medical school. Literally, they don't hear the word, which is unbelievable. And a lot of psychologists don't hear it. There's all these psychologies out there that completely ignore trauma. It's all about the behavior. So I think that's the big missing piece, Leonard.
Do you think all of America and most of the world now is experiencing some sort of trauma from the COVID?
Well, that again is a deep question, because you gotta understand, in my view, trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you. So everybody's experiencing COVID, but not everybody's going to be traumatized by it. Some people are, depending on their situation and their inner resources. Other people will just find their resilience and they'll find them more themselves as a result of COVID. But if you're asking, will there be long-term trauma-like consequences in this society? Likely there will be, because there's not enough sufficient resources or understanding to deal with traumatic event or potential traumatic event.
Right. Love your rabbit, by the way.
Yeah.
Maybe trauma wasn't the right word. Maybe grief. Is the country living with this incredible cloud of grief, not just for the people who've lost people, but we all see it on TV and the news every day, and we know 300,000 people in our country have died in 9 months.
Well, I hope there's grief. Grief is a healthy thing. Grief is a process where we come to terms with our loss and we experience our emotions around it. If there's no grief, it's not healthy. I hate to jump back into politics again, by the way. Trump is terrible when it comes to dealing with COVID. But, and the US really ought to ask itself, how come the richest country in the world has had by far the highest proportion of its population killed by COVID? Now, that's an amazing question, you know, but you know, COVID has taken its toll all over the world, and not just in the United States. And no country was able to save its population fully. Mm-hmm. Not Canada, you know, not anybody. So and when the thing came around, everybody minimized it a bit, you know. So now Trump is only entrenched in denial. He's just a man of denial, is who he is. He can't deal with reality. So he says it'll blow over, and you know. So yeah, he did a worse job than almost anybody in his position would have. That's true, but he's not single-handedly responsible for all the deaths.
No, and maybe in America, it's the television coverage is better lit than it is in other countries.
Look, but let's say without Trump, only 150,000 people would have died. That would have been plenty, you know. And it also, the 150,000 who did die because of his lack of leadership, that's a bad enough crime. We don't have to put all the 300,000 at his feet. What
no, 200,000.
Let's say 200,000.
Let me ask you my last question, because I know Ahbra's getting annoyed with me.
Yeah.
In terms of the American opioid overdose crises, what part do you think fate or destiny plays in those people's lives or lack of lives?
Well, fate and destiny are not the same thing.
Okay, fate and destiny.
Fate is something that's happened to us. We couldn't have helped it. You know?
So is that what you?
I couldn't help the fact that I was born in Eastern Europe during the Second World War. That was my fate. But that does not need to be my destiny. That does not need to define my destination. As soon as I become conscious, my fate no longer is my destiny, and that's the distinction. So the departure point between fate and destiny is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it doesn't. My fate does not have to be my destiny. If I can make that distinction clear.
So you're saying, rather than mindfulness, do you think high schools and colleges should all have consciousness classes? Because the 70,000 young people that die a year, it's because they are either unconscious or unaware of the specialness of life itself.
I think mindfulness is good because mindfulness leads to awareness.
Not necessarily. If you look at all these Buddhist spiritual mindfulness teachers who end up sleeping with the young women in their ashrams, you might say that mindfulness does not lead to automatically to consciousness.
I guess awareness and consciousness is different.
It depends what you direct your mindfulness towards, you know, and not just Christian, not just Buddhist, Sikh, Christian, Jewish, whatever you want to say. But in terms of the broader question, yes, when it comes to child rearing, consciousness ought to be our highest goal. But that's not a didactic teaching. That's a way of living. Mm-hmm. And so only conscious people can teach consciousness, not by, okay, kids, here are the 5 points of consciousness.
Right, I understand that, yes.
Multiple choice exam on consciousness tomorrow. No, it's can we be conscious so that our kids can grow up conscious? That's the question.
I can't believe it took this long before sexuality or sex was mentioned.
Wow.
I know, like an hour and 20 minutes. Can we end in like 8 minutes, Gabor? Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
I'm
Ahbra?
just going to take one from the audience. What do you do for fun and enjoyment?
Speak.
Well, I listen to classical music. I go for bicycle rides. I love my physical activities. My wife and I go for walks. We hang out together. I read. We love to dance when there's an opportunity. Um, Once a week, we have a virtual dinner with our children these days. Um, yeah, hang out with friends, although in the last year I haven't done that because I've been writing, but recently I have, and boy, did I enjoy it.
Bet.
We went for, so, movies.
So what do you watch? Do you watch Netflix? Do you watch any of the platforms? Netflix, Hulu, Amazon?
I have two levels of watching.
Okay,
One is when I'm on my elliptical machine.
right.
I like anything with swords and costumes. Um, doesn't matter how bad it is, like I just watched Vikings, mind you, that was pretty well done, but it's total
Yeah,
nonsense.
it is.
Well done nonsense, the Game of Thrones. But when exercising, that's great. But I also watched recently on my elliptical machine, I watched The Queen's Gambit, and I watched this wonderful series called Unbelievable about sexual assaults.
I saw that, yes.
Very well. I just finished watching that yesterday. Um, with my wife, we watch more serious movies, well, good movies. We're watching a Turkish TV series called Ethos.
Hmm.
If you haven't seen that, you really owe it to yourself. We saw a wonderful Argentinian film on Netflix called A Distinguished Citizen.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. I love watching dramatizations of Jane Austen novels, like
Well,
Emma.
One of those.
there's usually lots of those.
Yeah, lots
Love
of
to
lots
make
of.
them.
So there's a broad range. We watched The Undoing recently, which was sort of like upper class porn, but
Mhm.
I loved it. It was great.
did you? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was enthralled by it. I can't say I loved it.
Well, I was enthralled by it too.
It was
What
quite
about the Crown?
the big mystery in Undoing was which amazing dress is Nicole Kidman going to wear in the next scene.
Yeah. Well, it works in this time with COVID. It's good distraction.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, no, we enjoyed watching it. What about what, Len?
I was gonna say the Crown. I'm in the middle of watching the Crown.
I will not spend a minute sitting wasting my time with The Crown, but I
It
will
does-
watch it on my elliptical machine.
Okay, it's really well done. It's much
Is it?
better than you think.
Yeah, it's well done, lowbrow stuff. Yeah.
All right, let me redeem myself. Has your taste in poetry changed much from when you were a young member of the resistance and and wearing Bermuda shorts at Occupy Wall Street? Has your taste in poetry changed, and you think that could be helpful to people trying to get away from addiction?
Wait a minute. Occupy Wall Street happened 9 years ago. You think I was a young guy in Bermuda shorts 9 years ago?
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay,
And it was a different Occupy Wall Street.
you were in Bermuda shorts.
No, yeah, but I wasn't young.
No, okay, younger.
Well, when I was very young, I loved Hungarian poetry. Hungarian is a very poetic language, much more so than English.
Mm-hmm.
It's so flavorful and it's so evocative. So I loved Hungarian poetry. Now I'm less. I have a lot of poetry books, but I don't read them as much. Every once in a while, I do. I love Rilke. I love Emily Dickinson.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
love many others as well.
But for our viewers, you would recommend Hungarian poetry in the original Hungarian.
in the original language, absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Good.
I mean, how can you? I'm gonna read you a line. See if you can resist it. Éga nap melegtől a kopár szík sarja. Now, isn't that amazing? Doesn't that just move your heart?
Makes me hungry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just read you a line of Hungarian poetry.
Yes.
That I remember from childhood.
I can feel it.
Yeah.
I know we're going on, but I've developed an interest in Hildegard von Bingen. And I was, when I watched your podcast with Russell Brand, you brought her up.
Yeah.
Which I thought, it's kind of like one of those Bashert moments, like, I was in then the next day. And you said something like, they thought like she was an epileptic, but you imagine that her soul was just more open to higher or different vibrations. Is that sort of putting it right, or?
She lived in the realm that our friend Leonard experienced for a few seconds.
She lived in it.
She lived in it. She downloaded it. Who cares if she was epileptic? That's not where it came
No,
from.
I'm
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about the people who think to explain her by epilepsy. I'm saying they just don't get it. She lived in a different realm.
And who do you think lives in a different realm now that we're missing? The people we're overlooking, who we think are crazy or we think are, but are just.
So first of all, there's a lot of people that they just don't get the name in the papers or their faces on YouTube or television. Okay? And there's a lot more people have had these experiences. In terms of public names, I can only think of two who I really believe live in that realm authentically, as best I can tell, and I can't judge for sure.
Right.
Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And the other is A.H. Almas, A-L-M-A-A-S, whose real name is Hamid Ali. And he's a spiritual teacher, more modest and less well known, but in some ways, I think, extraordinarily deep, who lives in California. And he's a Kuwaiti Jewish guy about my age. And he's one of my mentors.
So that's A.H. Almas?
A-L-M-A-A-S. Now he's to hear him speak, he's very non-charismatic. He's like anti-charismatic.
Like Eckhart Tolle.
No, Tolle to me, when I listen to him, he's not spectacular or rowdy, but there's a deep presence about him that I sense. Almost is more subtle.
Really?
But I think almost for me, I don't want to compare the two or dismiss one in favor of the other, but almost for me has been a profound teacher. And the amazing thing is I get to work with him next year. I'll be doing an online thing with him next year, which is not why I'm mentioning him. I'm just saying those are the two that I know of that I think have really tapped into that realm. And expressed it in modern language. I mean, Hildegard and other people, everybody expresses it in the language of their times. Buddha expressed it in the language of his time. Jesus in the language of his time.
Somebody put up this, I can't pronounce it, but the second line of the poem you quoted, which I just think that's cute.
What's my cat's name?
It was Augie Laufer, and he put the second line of the poem you read, which, like I said, I can't. I wouldn't want to try pronouncing.
Yeah. So there's a Hungarian listening. And the second line is Tikad Suchkanyayok Legalistek Rajta.
Right.
This is the second line. Absolutely. So this is a Hungarian who wrote that. I mean, obviously. And it's one of the great national epics called Toldi by the poet Arany János or János Arany. Anyway, that's all the story.
What is your
Thank you, fellow Hungarian, for putting that on.
What's your cat's name?
Well, that's a story. It's Lucy, which actually means light, you know?
Yes.
Like lucid. But she's anything but. She keeps biting my wife, you know?
As I hear the word Lucy, I want to start talking about the Beatles, but I won't.
Lucy was the Diamonds, yeah.
Now that we've spent 90 minutes in the head of Dr. Gabor Mate, I just want to ask the final question, possibly the most embarrassing of all.
Yeah.
What do you think makes you so lovable and adorable?
It's not embarrassing. And it's not for me to answer because I get that. Mind you, I don't get it from everybody, believe me, and nor should I, you know. But I can also tell you that it doesn't matter how many millions of, not that it's been millions, but it doesn't matter how many thousands or messages I get of my lovability, it doesn't penetrate, Leonard, unless it's within already.
It's so true.
So much of the time when I've heard it, I've just felt embittered. For God's sakes, Why can't I sense that in myself? Why can't I feel it? Why don't I experience it? You know, but I can tell you what I think it is insofar as other people experience it. And it's not embarrassing. It's not about the ego. I do my best to tap into reality, including my own reality. And I'm not afraid to talk about it. And I think that's what it is. I mean, that's what people appreciate. In other words, what they're appreciating is their own authenticity that recognizes the degree to the degree to which authenticity shows up in me. So I think what people love about me is they get a mirror of their own authenticity.
Oh, that's beautiful.
In other words, they love themselves, as they should, but they think it's about me. It isn't. And if you want to know how inauthentic I can be, talk to my family.
That was beautiful. Thank you. That's a beautiful way to end.
Right.
Thank you so much for spending this time
Thank you.
at home with us as well.
Yeah.
It was really special for me. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye, Gabor.
I just want to say it's a great pleasure for me as well. So
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
You too. Thank you, guys.
And a happy, healthy 2021.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very happy New
See you
Year.
later.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And for everyone who's watching, this will be available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Writers in Treatment, very shortly. And it has been live streamed on our Facebook page, Addiction Recovery E-Bulletin. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for January's Chasing the News, Stone Cold Sober, to be announced. Thank you so much. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Anything, Leonard?
Oh, what? Fill in the blank. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're sorry we didn't get to ask everyone's questions or a lot of questions. Hopefully we'll get Gabor back in 6 months. We were going to have him live in LA this month, but obviously something got in our way. So just stay tuned. This is our weekly news journal. Sign up if you haven't already. Feel free to communicate with us in any way that you can.
Thank you.
And stay healthy, stay sane, and stay vibrant.
Bye.
Bye.